So we're going to be learning Hilchos Brachas, segment 5, and we've already learned that we're supposed to say the bracha slowly, not in haste. We're supposed to understand what we're saying. Now, what about having the proper kavanah when we say Hashem's name, the proper intention? So Hashem has many names. The names that are used in the brachas are Shem Yud Kei Vav Kei, the tetragrammaton, Yud, comprised of a Yud and a Hey and a Vav and Hey. And then we say Elokeinu, which also means our God, which is Hashem Elokim. But then when we say Yud Kei Vav Kei, instead of saying the tetragrammaton, we cannot pronounce the tetragrammaton, the Yud Kei Vav Kei. So what we do is we say, I'm going to pronounce it a little differently than the way we normally say it. We say Adnai. That's not the correct way to say it when you're actually making the bracha. Instead, you would say Ado, Ado, and then Anoi at the end of that. So Hashem's name may not be recited as written. It is written Yud Kei Vav Kei, which signifies He was, and He is, and He will always be. However, it is recited Adoi Noi, which signifies master of all. Many poskim rule that upon saying the name of Hashem, one must be mindful of both meanings of His name. So when you say the bracha, because you're using a replacement, the name Adoi and Noi, for the name of Yud Kei Vav Kei, so what you need to do is you need to have in mind both names, that Hashem is was, is, and will always be, and the name Adnai, meaning Hashem being the master, that also needs to be part of the intention. So you have to have intention for both of these. When reciting the word Elokeinu, our God, one should have in mind that He is almighty, all capable, and all powerful. So here we have it. Some place can tell us, though, that we don't necessarily have to have in mind both intentions when we say the first name of Hashem, Adnai. Instead, we could just have in mind that Hashem is just the master of all without having in mind that He was, and He is, and He will always be. Now, a bracha needs to be audible. A bracha must be recited loud enough so that one hears himself say the entire bracha. B'diavad, if a bracha was whispered so quietly that he could not hear it, as long as the words were actually recited, it is valid. However, if one merely formulates the bracha in his mind without actually reciting the words, it is not valid. So a person should not make a bracha in his mind, because that really doesn't help. If you just think a bracha, it's not going to help. You pray just in your mind. That's not the standard for prayer. Prayer needs to be verbal. Now, what happens if somebody suffers from some kind of illness and they're not able to articulate the words? So in cases where one is unable to recite a bracha audibly, for example, one has laryngitis, according to some poskim, one is permitted to formulate a bracha in his mind without reciting the words. So according to them, in this circumstance, you would be permitted to recite the blessing only in your mind and then partake of the food, because you simply are not in the position to be able to articulate the bracha. Okay, now it's important to articulate the words clearly, to clearly enunciate the words. The words of a bracha must be enunciated clearly and distinctly. And the Ramah writes in his commentary on the Torah, he writes, one should not skip a single word and be as careful in enunciating each and every word as if counting money. So what happens when you count money? A person who counts his money wants to make sure that he doesn't miss out some of the money, because otherwise nobody likes losing money. So you count 1, 2, 3, 20, 40, etc. You're careful in how you say the words. The same way a person should make his blessings, should recite his brachas. Baruch atah Hashem Elokeinu, you say it deliberately and clearly. Now, to illustrate a couple of mistakes that some people make, it's quite common. If the words Melech Olam are deleted from a bracha, it's not valid. Thus, if one slurred his words to recite Macha Olam instead of Melech Olam, then that doesn't work. That's not good. The bracha is not valid. Similarly, if one slurs the words Beire Priya Eitz in place of, he says Bei Priya Eitz instead of Beire Priya Eitz, instead of actually saying that Hashem creates all that grows on trees, instead he says Ba Priya Eitz, which means something else. That isn't the blessing. It doesn't constitute a blessing, and therefore one does not fulfill his obligation. It's especially to enunciate Hashem's name correctly. Many people incorrectly pronounce Adonai, like I told you before. When saying a bracha quickly, and the correct pronunciation is Adoi and Noi, with the accent on the third syllable on the Noi part. Okay, what about different languages? So it's preferable to recite a bracha in Hebrew. Ideally, persons who do not understand Hebrew should endeavor to learn this. They will recite the bracha in its ideal form, since otherwise, according to some poskim, they may not recite the bracha in Hebrew, unless you know the meaning. A bracha recited in a language other than in Hebrew is valid, providing that the person making the bracha understands what he's saying. So if you made it in Spanish or in English, if you understand what you're saying, it's kosher, it's good. And that the Hebrew text is accurately translated. Sometimes blessings are not accurately translated, so we have to make sure we're using a good translation. And finally, a bracha recited in Hebrew by one who does not understand the meaning of the text is nevertheless valid. So when it comes to Hebrew blessings, if somebody just simply parrots the words of the bracha and does not understand what they're saying, but as long as they said it in Hebrew, it is still good. Thank you for joining us for today's 5-minute Kollel. We will continue, God willing, tomorrow.